If you've ever had someone try to embarrass you in front of everyone, you know it doesn't just happen in a second. It builds. It's planned. And by the time it happens, they're already expecting you to sit there and take it. That's exactly what my mom thought was going to happen at my graduation dinner. She picked the place. She invited the people. She waited for the perfect moment. And when she finally stood up to speak, she thought she was about to define who I was in front of everyone in that room. What she didn't know was that something else was about to happen, something she couldn't control. And it only took one moment for the entire room to go silent. Before we get into this, welcome to Honor Unveiled. If you're new here, hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from or how long you've been here. And if this story reminds you of someone, don't forget to share it with them too, because some stories hit different when they're heard by the right person. Now let me take you back to the night it all started, because this wasn't just a random dinner. This was my graduation dinner, and everything about it was already set up. The story really starts on the day of my graduation, not at the dinner table, because by the time we all sat down that night, everything had already been building for weeks in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I had just finished a program that, honestly, no one in my family ever took seriously. It wasn't the kind of degree they brag about to relatives or post online with long captions about pride and success. To them, it was something temporary, something uncertain, something that didn't look impressive from the outside. And my mom made that very clear more than once. Not directly, not in a way that would start an argument, but through small comments that added up over time, the kind that sound harmless if you hear them once, but start to mean something very different when you hear them over and over again. She would say things like, "Let's see what you actually do with it," or, "I just hope this leads to something real." And every time she said it, she smiled like it was encouragement, but it never felt like that. It felt like she had already decided the outcome and was just waiting for me to prove her right. So when she insisted on organizing a graduation dinner, it didn't feel like support. It felt like something else, something more controlled, like she wasn't just celebrating the moment, but shaping how it would be remembered. She picked the restaurant herself, invited people I didn't even expect to be there, and made sure everything looked perfect from the outside, like a carefully arranged scene instead of a simple family dinner. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, because that's what you do when things don't fully make sense yet. You try to keep it normal, you try to assume good intentions, you try not to read too much into small details that might not mean anything on their own. But the closer it got to that night, the more those small details started connecting in a way that didn't feel random anymore. It felt planned, not in a loud or obvious way, but in that quiet, controlled way where everything is already decided before you even walk into the room. And by the time we actually got to the restaurant, and I saw who was sitting at that table, I realized this wasn't just a celebration. It was something else entirely. By the time we were all seated, the place looked exactly the way my mom would want it to look when she's trying to impress people, not just a regular dinner, but something slightly more polished, slightly more staged, like every detail had a purpose beyond just eating and talking. There were more people there than I expected, not just immediate family, but a couple of relatives we don't see often, 2 of her friends I barely knew, and even someone from her work, which didn't make sense to me at all at the time, because this was supposed to be my graduation dinner, not a networking event for her. At first, everything stayed on the surface level. People were congratulating me, asking the usual questions about what I studied, what I planned to do next, and I gave the kind of answers you give in those situations, polite, simple, not too detailed, just enough to keep the conversation moving without turning it into something deeper. But underneath all of that, something felt off. Not in a way I could point to immediately, but in the way conversations kept circling back to the same idea without saying it directly, like people were waiting for something, like there was a part of the evening that hadn't happened yet, but everyone was already aware of it except me. My mom was different too. She was more engaged than usual, moving the conversation, guiding it, making sure certain topics stayed in focus while others didn't last very long, and every time someone asked me something, she would listen a little too closely, like she was measuring my answers against something she already had in mind. Dinner went on like that for a while, normal on the surface but controlled underneath, and the longer it lasted, the more I started to feel like this wasn't just a celebration, it was leading somewhere specific. Then, at one point, she put her glass down, looked around the table, and smiled in that way people do when they're about to take control of the room without asking for it. The conversation slowly faded, not because she told anyone to stop, but because everyone seemed to understand that this was the moment she had been waiting for. And that's when I realized something very clearly. Whatever she was about to say was the real reason we were all there. She didn't rush into it, and that was the part that made it feel even more intentional, because instead of immediately saying something, she let that small silence settle over the table just long enough for everyone to turn their attention toward her without being asked. Then she picked up her glass, not to drink, but to hold it slightly in the air, smiling like this was going to be a light, proud moment. The kind of speech people give at celebrations when they want to say something meaningful without making it too serious. "I just want to say a few words," she started, her tone calm and controlled, the kind of voice that makes people lean in because it sounds warm at first. And for a second, I almost believed that's what it was going to be. She talked about how quickly time had passed, how it felt like just yesterday I was younger, how proud she was that I had finished something. And the way she said that word, finished, had just enough weight on it to make it sound like the achievement itself wasn't the important part, just the fact that it was done. People nodded, a couple of them smiled, and everything still felt normal enough that no one questioned it. Then the tone shifted, not dramatically, but enough that if you were paying attention, you could feel it immediately. She started talking about the future, about how important it is to be realistic, about how not every path leads where you expect it to, and how sometimes people think they're doing something meaningful when they're actually just delaying the real decisions they need to make. And now, everyone was listening more carefully. Because this wasn't general anymore. This was about me. She didn't say my name in that moment, but she didn't need to, because every sentence was clearly pointed in my direction, shaped in a way that made it sound like concern on the surface, but carried something sharper underneath. "I just hope," she continued, still smiling, "that this is a step toward something real, not just something comfortable." There it was. Not loud, not direct, but enough. A couple of people shifted in their seats, unsure whether to react or stay quiet, and I could feel that subtle change in the room, the moment when people realize a speech isn't just a speech anymore, it's something else. And she didn't stop there. She went on to talk about responsibility, about how success isn't just about finishing something, but about proving that it actually matters. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't encouragement. This was positioning. She was defining me, right there in front of everyone. And the part she didn't see was that I was already expecting it. I didn't interrupt her, and that was the first thing that changed the way that moment felt, because most people expect a reaction when something like that happens in public, especially when it's directed at you so clearly, but I stayed exactly where I was, listening, letting her finish every word without breaking the flow she had created. From the outside, it probably looked like I was just taking it, like I didn't have anything to say or didn't know how to respond. But that wasn't what was happening at all. I wasn't caught off guard, and I definitely wasn't confused. I was paying attention in a different way, not to defend myself, but to understand exactly how far she was willing to take it in front of everyone. Because there's a point in situations like that where it stops being about what's being said and starts being about what the room believes, and I could feel that shift happening slowly as she spoke, the way people leaned in, the way they stayed quiet, the way no one stepped in to change the subject. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad moment. This was planned. And once I realized that, something changed for me too, not emotionally, but strategically, because if someone takes the time to set something like this up, they're expecting a certain outcome, a certain kind of reaction that fits the story they're trying to create. And the easiest way to break that is not to react the way they expect. So instead of arguing or explaining myself in that moment, I leaned back slightly in my chair, picked up my phone from the table, and looked at it like I was just checking something simple, something unrelated to everything that was happening around me. No rush, no tension in my movement, just calm. And that's what made it different. Because while everyone else was still focused on her words, I had already shifted my attention to something else entirely, something that had been there the whole time, waiting for the right moment. I didn't speak yet, and I didn't need to, because the moment wasn't about interrupting her, it was about letting her finish, letting the room settle into what she had just said, and then changing everything in a way no one saw coming. And as she reached the end of her speech, as that final sentence hung in the air and people started to look back at me, waiting to see what I would do, that's when I knew. This was it. I didn't stand up, and I didn't try to match the attention she had just pulled into the room, because the point wasn't to compete with her moment, it was to change it completely without raising my voice or asking anyone to listen. I just unlocked my phone, tapped once, and turned the screen outward so the people sitting closest to me could see it first. At the beginning, no one reacted, because no one knew what they were looking at yet. And that's exactly how moments like that work. They take a second to register before they actually land. Then one of her friends leaned in slightly, her expression shifting just enough to catch someone else's attention, and within a few seconds, the focus at the table moved away from my mom and toward whatever was on my screen. I didn't explain it right away, and I didn't rush to say anything because the silence was doing the work for me, the same way it had just done the work for her. It wasn't a random image or something easy to dismiss. It was clear, structured, undeniable, a full breakdown of what I had been working on for the past year, the numbers, the contracts, the results that didn't need interpretation or opinion to make sense, the kind of proof that speaks for itself without needing a story around it. And the more people looked at it, the quieter the table became. Not the same silence as before. This one felt different, heavier. Because now, it wasn't about what someone thought I was doing or where they assumed I was headed. It was about something real sitting right there in front of them. Something that didn't match anything that had just been said about me a minute ago. My dad leaned forward slightly, trying to process what he was seeing, while my sister put her phone down completely for the first time that night, her attention fully on me now instead of whatever had been happening on her screen earlier. And my mom, she didn't move at first. She just stood there, still holding her glass, like her moment hadn't ended yet, like she was waiting for something to bring the attention back to her. But it didn't. Because once something like that shifts, it doesn't go back the same way. After a few seconds, she finally looked toward the table, then at me, then at the screen, and I could see that exact moment where everything she had just said stopped aligning with what everyone else was now seeing. And that's when I spoke. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. You said I needed something real, I said, keeping my tone steady, like this was just a continuation of the same conversation she had started. Then I slightly adjusted the phone so everyone could see it better. This is what I've been building. That was it. No long explanation. No argument. Because I didn't need one. The room had already changed. For a few seconds after I said that, no one tried to speak over it, and that was the first real sign that the moment had completely shifted. Because earlier the room was following her, reacting to her tone, her words, her direction, but now everything had slowed down around something she hadn't planned for. People weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. And more importantly, at what I had just shown them, trying to make sense of it, trying to match it with everything they had just heard a minute ago, and those two versions didn't fit together anymore. My dad was the first one to actually say something, not loudly, not in a way that tried to take control back, but in that careful tone people use when they're trying to understand something they didn't expect. He asked me how long I had been working on it, and even the way he asked that question was different from anything he had asked me before, because now it wasn't coming from doubt, it was coming from realization. I answered him simply, not turning it into a speech, not trying to prove anything beyond what was already there, because the proof didn't need help anymore, it was already doing its job. My sister, who had barely paid attention earlier, was now fully focused, asking small questions, trying to connect details, and for the first time that night, it felt like she was actually listening instead of just being present. And my mom, she tried to step back into the conversation. You could hear it in the way she cleared her throat slightly, the way she adjusted her posture, like she was about to bring the focus back to where it had been before, but the timing was gone. Because once people see something real like that, especially in a moment where expectations have just been broken, it's hard to redirect them back to a version that doesn't match anymore. She said something about how she just wanted the best for me. And under normal circumstances, that might have worked. It might have softened the situation, shifted the tone, given her a way to regain control of how everything was being interpreted. But now it sounded different. Not wrong, just incomplete. Because everyone at that table had already seen something that didn't need interpretation. And once that happens, explanations start to feel like they're catching up instead of leading. I didn't interrupt her, and I didn't challenge what she said directly, because again, the moment wasn't about arguing, it was about letting the difference speak for itself. And the difference was clear. A few minutes ago, she was defining who I was in front of everyone. Now, no one was asking her anymore. That night didn't turn into an argument, and honestly, that's what made it more real than anything else, because there was no dramatic scene, no shouting, no moment where everything exploded and then suddenly got resolved. It just shifted, quietly, but in a way that you can't undo once it happens. We stayed at the table for a while after that, and the conversation continued, but it wasn't the same conversation anymore. People weren't asking me if what I was doing would work. They were asking how it worked, how long it had been building, what I planned to do next. And those are very different questions, even if they don't sound that different at first. Because one comes from doubt, and the other comes from recognition. My mom didn't say much after that. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the moment she had created earlier didn't belong to her anymore, and trying to pull it back would have made that even more obvious. And I didn't push it. I didn't need to. Because the point was never to embarrass her back or prove something in a way that would turn into another version of the same thing. The point was to let the truth exist in that room without being controlled by anyone else's expectations. Looking back at it now, the part that stayed with me wasn't the speech, and it wasn't even the moment the screen lit up. It was the realization that sometimes people don't misunderstand you by accident. Sometimes, they decide who you are based on what they can see. And stop looking any further. And if you try to argue with that, you end up stuck in the same conversation over and over again, trying to explain something they've already chosen not to understand. But when you show them something real, something they can't reshape or reinterpret to fit their version, the conversation changes on its own. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to prove anything twice. You just have to let it be seen. So if you've ever been in a position where someone tried to define you in front of others, where they spoke with confidence about something they didn't fully understand, maybe the answer isn't to react in that moment. Maybe it's to build something strong enough, that when the time comes, it speaks for you. And when it does, you won't need to say much at all. They tried to define me in public. I let the truth redefine me instead. Subscribe and share. Goodbye.